Hello.
Hello, welcome to Powerssquared Raw and Real. I'm going to have you introduce us because I have a little one who keeps paging me.
Yes, he has paged you many times in the last few minutes. All right, I am JL Powers, calling or hanging out live from California, and my brother, who's currently absent, is MA Powers, coming to you live from Maine, where his 3-year-old is keeping him nice and busy. And today, this is Powerssquared Raw and Real 28, and we are going to discuss myths in American education today. And I think one of the reasons why we wanted to discuss that today, it's a topic we'll probably return to a lot. Just as a little background information, I have been an educator for over 20 years, since 1999 when I started teaching writing at the college level. And I've been teaching continuously ever since then. And my brother and I both homeschool our kids as well, and we were homeschooled. And I think the impetus for this talk is ostensibly because Matt is going to talk tomorrow to a group of dyslexic students about his own journey to learning to read and write as a severely dyslexic person, although he was never formally diagnosed. So I've just given a little introduction, Matt, including the fact that you're giving a talk tomorrow.
Right.
So do you want to talk maybe a little bit about what you're planning to talk about? And then I have some experiences of my own from the classroom and also as an author in the classroom that I thought I would talk about. But
sure, I think it'd be good. I think I'm going to talk a little bit about what I'm going to talk about, but I'm also going to start with just an introduction to, I think, our education system goes back to at least what I've read, of course, goes back. Basically, the organized education system is from the 19th century, and parts of it go back further. But this whole organized system. Okay, it's just not going to work. Come on down. And it was set up to basically be a system where you got people who knew the same thing and could repeat and do the same thing in all parts of the British Empire. And so it stressed accuracy and memorization.
Somebody's really sad.
What does the matter, honey? Come here. You want to see Aunt Jessica? This isn't working today, is it?
Hey, Owen.
All right. So I think we have an education system that is geared now for people who are very good at knowing what's going on and what's like being able to pick up what other people want them to know and understand quickly, and then be able to reproduce that faithfully over and over and over again for people, which isn't bad. There's nothing wrong with that. That's very useful and good for many types of jobs. But it's becoming more and more apparent that having those abilities are just not that important anymore, because if it turns out that reproducing something the exact same way as it's been shown before over and over and over again is actually best done by a computer. You don't need somebody to do that and have those skills in the same way as we did 150 years ago. Account books, those types of things, being able to write up a document in a certain particular way, right? And so I think what happened along the way with this education system is that it was very good for a certain type of person, and a lot of creative types who struggled with that over repetition and being able to reproduce the same thing over and over again may have been considered educationally deficient. Mm-hmm. It's just not going to work. The internet's not working well, okay, buddy? So it's just not going to work, all right? So you're just going to have to hang out with me. Sorry. It's always has to get back on my train of thought. And so there's a different type, I think, of knowledge, and a different type of execution of knowledge is very important in this day and age. That isn't necessarily that repetition and doing things. If you're going to be here, you've got to be a little quieter, all right, bud? You need to be creative, and that the end goal of education now is not to keep a vast empire together. The end goal of education is to get yourself on the cutting edge where nobody's ever seen or done what you've done before, whether it's a creative endeavor. You know what? I just don't know if this is going to work.
You got both kids, or two of them, two of the three here. Well, that's really interesting, particularly because your focus in terms of what you've spent time thinking about with education is like how we learn and what we need and the end goal of education. And I do think clearly what we need in the modern age are problem solvers, and that repetition doesn't necessarily go hand in hand, just you know, memorizing the way to do things doesn't necessarily go hand in hand with being a problem solver. Sure. You know, I mean, I just think we have vast environmental problems that are going to confront us. We have vast political problems that are, you know, looming ever more down the road and so to me, problem solving seems like a major skill that we're going to need. And I don't see our modern education system doing a very good job teaching that skill.
Sure. And so I'm going to be talking, of course, in this dyslexia center. And I think for me, some of the things that I want to stress is that, like, some of the things that are seem so unbelievably important in our education system, like you must learn to read by the time you're 6 or you're deficient, right? Or you must be able to do certain things at a certain time, right? If you are even a half a semester late, then you might be considered that you have an education problem, right? That you are deficient somehow. And I know teachers often don't think that. Owen, come here. You can't be in here. I'm having a hard time thinking because you're dropping all those things and you're yelling. All right. All right. Thank you.
Anyway, so you were saying.
And so the things that turned out to be important for me and my education, and I think are for most fields, and that would include anything in the creative world, is that you get to a point where you're doing something that people can't tell you whether it's good or not anymore, because there's been no critique of it like that. Okay, in that particular system, or you're showing them that in breast cancer research, you're looking at things that have never been looked at before. So nobody can tell you whether what you're doing or the direction that you're going is going to work or is going to fail. And so you have to have a high capacity and high level of okay, this is hard, this isn't working, now let me change what I'm doing and do another hard round and do another and work hard at this. And nobody's going to tell me until it works that it works and it's going good. You're not going to get an A, you're not going to get a B, you're not going to get a C. They're just going to be like, well, you know, it didn't work. What are you going to do next, right? And so I think that's where we want to be in education. And that's, of course, you need to practice. Of course, you need to get to the point where you can do these different things. But I think what I want to stress partly in this talk is that in the end, when you know something, it doesn't matter when it is. Like for me, I didn't learn to read until I was 10. Or it's you will always struggle with certain things. I always struggle with spelling. It'll just always be the way it is. But there are other people out there who hopefully you can ask for help with, right? Mm-hmm. And you can do these things, and so don't let those fears of the things that you're not necessarily 100% good at keep you from pursuing something that you might be good at, the other aspects of it. And in fact, most people won't pursue, I think, we're not taught to pursue things that we aren't good at right away. Like nobody's going to steer you in the direction of certain sciences or certain, just because if you don't somehow show some sort of like you're good at it. But the problem is, I think we lose a lot of very talented people who would be good at science, or would be good at math, or would be good at art, or would be good at writing, just because we don't allow them to be bad at it.
Right. Well, we're very results oriented in American culture. And so, and you can see how our whole education system has been derived from this, right? Looking, you know, just at the testing structure is very results oriented, and clearly problematic in so many ways. I mean, but yeah, when something is about the process and not about the end results, then that is, you know, much more difficult to judge, and much more difficult to, you know, figure out whether the process is working, you know. And so our American culture and our American education system aren't really structured around that kind of life, really, that kind of career, that kind of learning, even though that's what we really need. That's, you know, in so many areas. You posed a really interesting question on the description of this talk that I wanted to ask you about, and that was whether modern education perhaps caused some of the difficulties that we see with in kids these days.
Yeah, and I think it does, and like I think that we are so stressed on certain tests and getting certain things done in a certain time, and we've cut down so much of the other way that we learn, which is through physical activity, physical playing, physical area, that kids just they're burnt out and they're done. And so of course they seem like they are having difficulties learning things that I think if we just let them go out and play and go out and do other things and be physical and learn with their hands and learn. And I'm talking at a much older age, like 10, 11, these kids, and let them be like, hey, let's go look at wood shop. Let's do these other things. Why don't we do some painting? Then they get into a space where they're able to listen about reading. They're able to listen about forming words. They're able to listen, and they have experiences where it's more important than just people telling them this is important. And I think that's the biggest driver of disinterest, which can look like a disability in education, is often a total divorcing between necessity of a subject and the teaching of that subject. There's no connection for a kid that this is a good thing for me to know. And of course, they're not going to memorize it. And of course, unless they love you as a person, they're not going to learn this unless they are doing it solely because they like you and they want to please you, the teacher, you, the educational system. Then they'll learn it. And so what you end up with is people who don't really care about the education, that teacher, who don't really particularly care about the educational system and don't thrive in that system, who fall through the cracks, not because they can't eventually do it, but because their motivations are probably more pure, in a sense. Like they're like, why do I need to know this, right? And sometimes you need more life experience in other in other ways, in other contexts, for you to get to that point where you do want to know it, or have it be given to you in the sense of, I know, why don't you try this? You know, if you don't like it right now, we'll try it again later, you know, type of idea, where instead of being like, oh, you are now a bad student because you didn't do this, because you're not interested, it is now, oh, you didn't like that? Let's try that. And of course, I'm sounding probably like a fan of Montessori education.
Right.
But I do think that we drive some of these disabilities because we force kids to do things they don't want to do and they're not ready to do, and to the point where they totally just check out and give up.
You know, you've brought up actually a really interesting thing that I've never thought about before, and that is we talked about teaching as the teaching as the you know, results driven and repetition, but you brought up this idea of the cult of personality around teaching too, that sometimes what drives someone's loving, we have, because so much of what teaching is divorced from what a kid is naturally trying to learn. I mean, I learned how to type because I wanted to learn to type so that I could write on the computer, right? That's how I learned to type. And I am a really, really fast typer now.
Yeah, I learned to type because it was a video game and I wanted to play video games.
Right.
That was the only one I was allowed to play.
We had those motivations.
Different motivations.
Different motivations, yeah. But
both effective, by the way.
But the point is like, okay, so this past year I launched a publishing company, and I actually suddenly needed a much more complex accounting system. Right. And so I would never have learned how to do QuickBooks if it wasn't that I needed to. Like, I wasn't interested in learning QuickBooks. I learned because I needed it for my business. And certainly that's how I learn. And I think most people learn best is when they need to know something or really want to know something, then they learn. But what you've pointed out is that because our students are essentially forced to learn outside of that context, they're required to learn what that school system has designated as required to learn for 8-year-olds or kids in 2nd grade or 3rd grade or whatever. Right. And they have to learn it at that time in that space. Then what ends up motivating them is this personality of this teacher who either inspires them to want to please him or her or doesn't. Right.
Right. And you can understand why this becomes problematic. One, because,
absolutely.
I think a cult of a fetish of a system where you're doing it because you want to get the A, not because you care about the subject, really,
or because you want to please,
or because you want to please the teachers. It can be abusive, but two, I wonder if that is one of the reasons why we struggle teaching certain demographics of the United States, because they don't have the cultural, they're not put at home into a cultural mode where they feel like they need to please the authority figure that you represent. This is not a bad thing. It's just, you are not an authority figure
that they feel that they want to please or need to please. And no, that's not a bad thing, actually.
And that's not necessarily,
see it as a huge crisis, but
right, that's not a bad thing. And so I think we are actually really, really, really good as a nation of educating white people.
Yep, because the authority figures tend to be white, and the white people tend to want to respect those white authority figures and please those white authority figures. And it all, it's a very, I mean, not only is it racist, but it's just so interesting to think about that culture of personality. And as a teacher myself, I have totally bought into that. I'm just realizing this. I mean, I don't so much, I've taught online for years. And so nobody cares about my personality online. I mean, it's a non-entity. Like I'm not a presence. But when
Right.
I've taught in person, it feels like you have to be kind of charismatic and dynamic and engaging and all of those things in order to engage your students. And so you really buy into that whole, this is how I'm going to inspire my students, by them liking me.
Right.
And I can see how deeply problematic that is. Yeah. I just never thought about it before.
And I mean, I don't think it's bad to have students like their teacher or find their teacher interesting or dynamic. That's not what I'm saying. But the ultimate deep goal of education is I think we need to ask ourselves what that is, right? What is the ultimate goal of education? Is it, and I think I pose this question in this too, is what is education? Is education so that I get a 4.0 in high school or my dream college, right? Is that education? Right. Or is there something deeper about education? Can we define it as something more broad and more deep? But then if we do that, then we have to allow the fact that there are other types and different ways of education. And I think it broadens out what that education means. Meaning like anything that that teaches you, let's say the definition of education would be anything that teaches you to function as an adult and be a successful human being in our culture, then that means that we are sorely falling down on the education job because we're stressing an academic idea of education and not something deeper. That education. So I guess again, I come down to what is education? How do we define it? And what does that mean to us as a culture? And and depending on how we define that, we will either run into more and more problems as we need a different type of attitude towards life as we get older, or we'll solve a bunch of problems, I think.
That's probably a good place to stop because we've been going a little bit longer than normal. There's so much more to say about this. Maybe next week we can do part two.
Maybe I can listen to this and reiterate it because I am a little distracted here.
Yeah.
All right. We'll talk to you later.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Don't forget to visit us at www.powerssquared.com. And we'll see you next week for a different Raw and Real.
Bye.